What family secret was finally spilled in your family? Found out my uncle is actually my brother. My mom had him when she was so young that my grandparents raised him. My sister cheated on her husband throughout her entire marriage to the point that all 3 of her kids have different biological fathers. When my mother fell ill and I took over her finances, I found thousands of pounds of gambling debt on her credit cards. Then I found adoption papers for a child Shed had before me that Shed never mentioned. Then another family member told me my dad didn't die in a car crash but committed suicide in prison. Damn, that's a lot. I hope you're doing well. Thank you, I'm doing fine. My mother died from her illness and I found the adoption papers the day before the funeral, and I got told about my dad on the day of the funeral. Before that I thought we were really normal, very boring people. What happened to the adopted child? Don't know. She kept his birth certificate, and there was a letter from solicitors saying she was late in signing the adoption papers, so she obviously had second thoughts about giving him up. My grandma didn't drive. I thought she couldn't, but it was just never discussed. One day when I was maybe 7 to 8, I'd been trying to get anyone to drive me to the store for candy. We were visiting my aunt and uncle. Grandma lived with them. They had bid honey at the local store, which I could no longer get at home. But no one would take me to the store. Finally I said I'd just ask Grandma, and my cousin chimes in with, "Grandma can't drive." "Oh, you bet your sweetest I can drive. They just don't let me." Grandma had overheard and she was in high dudgeon. But that's all that was said about it, and my aunt finally took me to the store, so I forgot about it. Years later, when I'd just gotten my license, I asked my mom what was up with Grandma not driving. She explained that during Prohibition Grandma bootlegged alcohol for moonshiners. She was very successful at it. She was so successful at it that when the moonshiners were finally busted, even though the revenuers never caught my grandma, her license was suspended by the state to never be reissued. Later in life she was told she could petition for it back, but it came with an admission of guilt or some such. She told him to go to hell. I love this story so much. Your grandma was an old-timey badass. I knew an old man who, when he was a little kid, watched the bootleggers speed through their town as it was supposedly quite the exciting event for their small farming community. Little kids were probably watching your grandma race down the roads of their towns back in the day, too. She had a way about her. That's for damn sure. Cats hanging around your place and you can't get rid of them? Just rub their ass raw with a piece of corncob and splash turpentine on it. That'll get 'em gone. Note, do not actually do this. Cruelty to animals laws have come a long way since the 1930s. Can't get rid of ducks who are eating in your garden? You get a piece of salt pork a few inches long, and you real tight tie some fishing line to it. Dangle it out there to the ducks, but give yourself 5 feet of line per duck. That first one will eat it, and it'll go through their system in minutes. By the time the hour is up, you'll have 6 ducks on a string and you can lead those bastards to someone else's garden. But my favorite memory was her sitting on a rocker on the front porch, wrapped in a shawl, chewing tobacco, and spitting off the edge to the flower bed. My uncle comes pulling up, gets out of the car, and he's white as a ghost. Everyone asks what's wrong, and he starts explaining that just as he topped the hill coming out of town there were 2 semi-trucks coming right at him in both lanes. He did the only thing he could do, and he skirted the ditch on the shoulder but managed to keep the car from going down into the bar ditch. Barely survived. Grandma Hofson says, "That's the difference between you and me. It'd hit that son of a bitch head on. Spit." I would read a whole blog with nothing but stories of your grandmother. She was one of a kind. She wrapped paper plates in saran wrap to reuse them. I'm not sure on the trade-off there. She'd once heard the phrase, "He's so tight he kept a rock in his pocket to save on shoe leather." Now, don't worry if that confuses you. You see, people used to strike matches against the bottom of their leather shoe soles, because matches didn't have a striking pad on the side. But she liked this so much, she kept a rock with her just in case. When she made her famous banana nut bread, she had these tiny loaf pans, and she'd make each of the kids their very own loaf. She could peel an apple with a paring knife in under 10 seconds with the peel in one long piece. She'd then scrape a spoon across the surface of the apple to make applesauce to hand feed me even when I was old enough to feed myself. She wouldn't go to the storm cellar until it was an honest-to-God tornado warning, and if it was reported as anything under an F3, she wouldn't even do that. She was fearless, and she expected the same from every adult, but she was usually disappointed. She swatted wasps with her open palm, and anyone who'd been afraid of the wasp, she'd pick it up and flick it at him. More, please. She didn't have a lot of rules, but she enforced them with vigor. No singing at the dinner table. First warning, she'd pop her teeth out and sit 'em on her napkin. The threat was, keep singing and you can get your own pair of these. Shirts must be worn at the dinner table. This gravy is hot and it'd be a damn shame if you suffered terrible burns when she dumped it on your half-naked idiot self. And whatever you do, never pick your nose. She'd roll up a newspaper and thwack you with it the first time, but the second time she'd just backhand you. Pretty much driving your own finger up your nose. I never had that happen to me, but I didn't think my cousin would ever stop bleeding. All of her most violent punishments were reserved for adults. She figured adulthood started at around 15. Kids would get spankings. She'd have you go pick your own switch, and then she'd beat your ass with it. But whatever you did, you didn't want to refuse. She'd skip the switch and haul out the razor strop. This long, thick piece of leather used to sharpen straight razors. Trust me, you wanted the switch. The strop was brutal. Okay, so you realize at this point you're gonna have TP publish a book of shit my grandma did at this point, right? I'd buy. My great-great-grandfather was exiled and banned from Missouri for being a sheep thief. I read an amusing anecdote here on Reddit a few days ago. In Europe, I want to say either Ireland or Wales, stealing a sheep was a capital crime, but shagging a sheep was just met with a lot of embarrassment. So if a sheep thief was caught out in the fields with no good explanation of what he was doing out there, it behooved him to pretend that he was a degenerate pervert rather than a thief. And that is how the stereotype and jokes about sex with sheep came about. The penalty for livestock theft was to have your hand removed. The penalty for bestiality was to have a finger removed. Sheep thieves would claim buggery to lose only a finger instead of the wrist. As a young teenager, my grandma shot her pedophile father in the back while he was sleeping. He had been molesting her and all her siblings. She ran away after being hidden by her brother for some time. Her father survived though. Thankfully my grandma never faced any legal consequences, but she was batshit crazy until the day she died. My aunt told me at her funeral because I asked why grandma was the way she was. That's heartbreaking she had to go through that. After my grandfather passed, we found out he had fathered a child when he was posted in Italy during World War II. He never knew. His mother intercepted any letters from the Italian girl. He came home, met and married my grandmother and had 4 children. I forget who in the family found out and how. It's crazy to think we have a whole Italian family out there. Edit, went to sleep and woke up to crazy notifications. Thanks for the awards. To clarify, I'm in the UK, not that it's relevant to the story. My oldest aunt is 77, so this kid would be at least 79 by now, I would think. We've considered doing the DNA testing, but some family members aren't comfortable with how those companies could use the information. It's a really sad story, but if his mother hadn't intercepted the letters, I wouldn't exist. It's a weird place to be in emotionally. Imagine that Italian girl sending letters and believing someday a reply will come. Thinking about it makes me sad. Relative did not just fall off a bridge with her baby, she jumped. It seems obvious in hindsight, but they reported it differently both in the news and to younger family members. Edit, wow, this blew up. I just want to say it's been weirdly really nice reading all of the comments here. I knew this was common in a hush-hush way, but never the stories of other real people like this. I used to work in a field dealing with suicide prevention, and even though some may see the passing as a result of suicide, a lot of family members and loved ones have a very difficult time coping with the idea that the victim passed due to these circumstances, ESP when children are involved. This is not uncommon to report differently, as it is not something a lot families are able to come to terms with, and understandably. I am really sorry to hear about your relative, though, and I hope some of the wounds have somewhat healed over time. Edit, whoa. I did not expect so many people to respond with their personal stories and experiences. I am sorry I haven't gotten around to replying to everyone. Also, thank you for the awards. Today has been a rough one, so to see so many people sharing, having legitimate, civil conversations, and just overall the sheer amount to amazing people seriously brings happiness to my day, even if this is such a sad topic. I've heard that with autoerotic asphyxiation, the family is more likely to report it as suicide because the truth is too embarrassing. Interesting to see how people cope with death so differently.